Welcome to Gospel Tangents. I'm Greg Prince.
Dr. Greg Prince is the only Mormon who serves on the board of directors for a Methodist seminary in the D.C. area. In our next conversation with him, we're going to talk about how the Christian right has dealt with gay rights, especially with regards to Prop 8. We'll delve into especially how the Methodist Church is struggling with this issue. And Greg had some interesting things to say with regards to Methodism. Check out our conversation. Hey, I also want to let you guys know that in June, I'm going to be in the Kansas City/Independence area. So if you are going to be in the area, drop me a line at gospeltangents@gmail.com. I'd love to get together. I'll be doing kind of a working vacation. I'll be there for a couple weeks. So anyway, love to get together with some of my fans out there in Independence/Kansas City area. I'm going to spend the first week in Kansas City and then try to see some church sites as I can. So love to meet you. So once again, send me an email at gospeltangents@gmail.com if you're in that area. Now back to our conversation.
This has not been a series of victories for the church.
It started out that way, though. Is that a fair statement?
When they walked across the street, they were on the winning side of Hawaii, and they were on the winning side of Prop 22, and they won Prop 8, but were on the losing side.
Won the battle but lost the war.
Yeah. Because with the death of President Hinckley early in 2008, the church lost the man who probably best understood the PR value of this issue. And his insistence had been, we need to be in this battle, but we need to be in the background. We don't want to get out there in front because that will have repercussions that we don't want. Mm-hmm. And the church was able to follow that in Hawaii, they followed it in California, in some other states that had a much lower profile nationally. But then when he died and the request came from the Catholic Church in California to have the Mormons join the coalition, Thomas Monson jumped on it immediately. And the church leaped in with both feet and took a profile that, even though they tried to conceal the financial aspect of it by having church members donate money to a front organization rather than having the church donate the money, the proposition came to be known as the Mormon proposition.
Okay, so let me make sure, because I'm not super familiar with Prop 22, but as we're going through here, I want to make sure we're following the timeline. So back in '84, Oaks puts forth this memo what was going on in '84? Because in my mind, I don't think gay rights was a big issue back then.
It was not a big issue, but it was something that clearly was on his mind, and I think on the mind of some of his colleagues. And it was just look, here's a position paper, here's what we need to be thinking about in strategy as we move forward, because I think that these issues will achieve greater prominence, and we're going to have to deal with them.
Was AIDS a big issue back then? I know it was more in the later 80s.
It was starting to blow up big time, the early 1980s, and that probably had something to do with his thinking on it.
Okay.
Although it didn't deal a lot with the AIDS epidemic. So you had that. The Hawaii lawsuit, which began in 1991, was the first time that marriage equality really took a serious hold on the national consciousness.
Okay.
Then what Prop 22 in California did in 2000 was to embed in state law a prohibition on same-sex marriage.
So it put in a prohibition.
It put in a prohibition, but it did so as a state law.
Okay.
8 years later, after a series of lawsuits that were combined into one, the California Supreme Court struck down Prop 22, saying that it was unconstitutional per the California Constitution. So the proponents of Prop 22 were already gathering signatures for a proposition that had identical wording, but that was an amendment to the state constitution. rather than a state law. So if something is struck down as unconstitutional, if you can amend the Constitution, then it becomes de facto constitutional. And that was the whole point of Prop 8.
Okay.
So it had a much different legal footing. Now, eventually, Prop 8 was challenged not in California court because there would have been no standing to declare it unconstitutional. It was challenged in federal court and was struck down as being unconstitutional per the United States Constitution.
Okay. So Prop 22 was declared unconstitutional. You said it was in about 2000?
No, it was passed in
2000.
2000. It was declared unconstitutional in May of 2008.
Okay.
But
and
the
so then the following
Prop 8 forces had already begun collecting signatures
just in case
to put it on the ballot.
Okay. Okay. So between May and November, there were a significant number of gay marriages that occurred in California. Is that correct?
Thousands.
Tens
Yes.
of thousands. Okay. So by November, the church, with a coalition of the Catholic Church and some other organizations. Now, one of the things that I found interesting last night was you said that that the Mormon Church combined with the Catholic Church and some evangelical organizations for some sort of a front organization. And then you said that they all said, well, we're behind you, but they weren't. Can
Well,
you
this
tell us a
went
little
back
more?
to 2000,
Okay.
and it was reminiscent of Lucy and the football.
Okay.
I won't lift up the football this time. And every time Charlie Brown fell for it, and every time she lifted up the football, and he wound up on his back. So in 2000, the other churches said, we're in this together, but the LDS Church wound up carrying all the water. In 2008, they said, no, this time we're really in this together, and the LDS Church wound up carrying most of the water. Because the money was given to a front organization, it's very difficult to figure out how large a role church members played in financing Prop 8. The best estimates are at least 50% of the $40 million that the Yes on 8 movement collected came from Latter-day Saints.
Mm-hmm.
It could have been substantially more than 50%, but we know that much just from reverse engineering, because the donors' contributions were registered with the California Secretary of State. And a group of innovative church members looked at that list and started disseminating it to their network throughout the state and identifying church members and then tabulating the amount of money collectively that had been given by them.
Oh, wow.
This is the main reason that it became known as the Mormon Proposition. The church also had a very impressive ground game going, where there were wards organized to do phone banks, to carry placards on the streets, to do door-to-door canvassing. Even the No on 8 people had to acknowledge that this was a very, very impressive organization in the way that it was able to mobilize. But that just embedded more deeply in the public consciousness that this happened because of the Mormon Church, hence the Mormon Proposition, hence the immediate and sustained and rather ferocious backlash against the church the day after Prop 8 passed.
Is this just because the Mormons are better organized than evangelicals and Catholics, or what do you think there?
Well, they certainly were better organized on this. The structure of the Mormon Church adapts very well to being mobilized on short notice. Usually that's for very beneficial things, like natural disasters. That we were on the ground making a big difference in Katrina in New Orleans before anybody else got there. So it's very impressive, but it can be used in a variety of directions, and in this case, the reaction, I think, caught church leaders totally by surprise.
So I'm curious about that, because it does seem like, especially I know abortion's kind of a big issue today, and it does seem like, and I'll just call it the Christian right, which Mormons are sort of members, I guess. But it does seem like the Christian right, especially with regards to abortion, is pretty well organized. Why doesn't that translate over to, say, Prop 8?
I don't know.
Okay. I do know, you mentioned a few times, in fact, last time on our interview, that you're a member of the Board of Governors at Wesleyan Seminary there in D.C., is
yes.
that right?
Mm-hmm.
Can you update us on what's going on with the Methodist Church?
The Methodists have a heap of trouble on this. In February of this year, they had what is termed a called general conference. They normally have general conferences once every 4 years, but they can have a special conference, and they did it for one issue, and that was LGBTQ. And there were really three elements that they were considering during this conference. One is, how do we deal with religious talk about gays? Do we brand them as apostates? Do we brand them as sinners? The second was, will we allow the ordination of gay clergy? And the third was, will we allow the performing of gay marriages? The conservatives prevailed. And that was primarily because of Africa. 45% of the delegates to the conference were from Africa. And that vote, which was strongly homophobic, combined with the delegates from the American South, prevailed, and it put the Methodist Church in a more homophobic stance than they had been prior to the conference. The other alternative that was put forward and voted down was called the One Church proposal. And that was written primarily by the head of our Board of Governors. So he was front and center in the debate, and he and other delegates from Wesley were just devastated with the outcome. It puts them in a much more difficult position organizationally than the LDS Church right now, because there's the very real possibility of permanent schism, that the United Methodist Church might not wind up being very united anymore. They're trying to work out some kind of a compromise that can avoid that. And when I went to the board meeting earlier this week, Tom looked at me and he said, I never thought I'd see the day when the Methodists would make the Mormons look progressive.
Well, that's interesting. So, the November policy came out, which sounds like it's where, is that where the Methodist Church is right now? Is where the LDS Church was in 2015?
No, there are some fundamental differences in it. For instance, there has been no action on the part of the Methodists to say, we declare these people in a state of apostasy, they are subject to church discipline, we will not perform rites of passage on their children. Those are the elements of the November 2015 policy. It's different in saying, it mostly focused on the latter two of those three issues that I mentioned, the ordination of gay clergy and the performing of same-sex marriages. So, on the third one, we are in agreement right now institutionally with the Methodists.
That we won't do gay marriages.
We actually are in a more progressive stance.
Now,
because we do ordain openly gay clergy. Now, we don't have a professional class of clergy, so it's an all-lay priesthood. But for more than a decade, we have sent openly gay missionaries, male and female, on full-time proselytizing missionaries. So we are indeed ordaining gay clergy. But it's different.
As long as they're celibate.
As long as they're celibate, yeah.
Okay.
But for the Methodists, that's not an option. They're saying no gay clergy.
So celibate or no, just period. if you declare you're gay. Do they have any clergy that have come out as gay after? And do they get defrocked? You don't know? Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. So, yeah, it's just interesting to me to see how other groups are dealing with this issue. And I'm just really curious why this became the Mormon proposition as not a Christian right proposition, especially here in California. Do you have any ideas on that?
It was because of the dominant role that the church played, both in fundraising, raising over half the total, and the church, I think, accounts for maybe 2 or 3% of the population of California, and they raised over 50% of the money. And then because of the ground game, they were out there in thousands, either on the streets or manning phone banks or doing door-to-door canvassing. They pretty much had an idea across the entire state of who was going to vote what. And part of the strategy was for those who are leaning towards Prop 8, in other words, prohibiting gay marriage, we'll keep visiting them and encouraging them and making sure that they have a ride to the polls if they need it. For those who are leaning the other direction, we'll stay away from them.
Well, it's just so funny to me because it feels to me like, and I know abortion's kind of the hot issue right now, but it feels to me like the Christian right is very organized on that issue. Why wouldn't that translate to this gay issue?
Don't know.
Don't know? It just seems strange to me.
But on the abortion issue, the LDS Church has tended to have a fairly progressive stance. That for years and years and years, we have carved out exceptions for rape, for incest, for the health of the mother, and those prevail to this day. The current legislation that's being passed in red states doesn't allow for that. And that's intentional because they want to push this issue into the Supreme Court as quickly as they can to try to overturn Roe versus Wade. But the LDS Church has consistently maintained a position that even though it condemns abortion in principle, it has these important carve-outs.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's interesting.
I hope you enjoyed our conversation with Dr. Greg Prince. In our next conversation, we'll talk about the reversal of the exclusion policy. Dr. Prince tells us that that was even more difficult for Orthodox members.
And it also creates a dilemma that may even affect the Orthodox church member more than the progressive church member, and that is, wait a minute, you told us this was revelation, and now 3 years later, you're saying it's back to where we were? That creates a real dilemma.
If you'd like to hear the entire interview uncut, please support Gospel Tangents and become a subscriber. For just $5 a month, go to patreon.com/gospeltangents and you can hear the entire interview. And you can also get transcripts available at either our Amazon website, or if you want to give the money to me and not Amazon, please subscribe on my website at gospeltangents.com and you can click the yellow subscribe button. Of course, we're also on Facebook, Twitter, and all the other places. Make sure you subscribe on iTunes at tinyurl.com/gospeltangents. And don't forget to click here to subscribe on YouTube, here for a transcript, and over here we've got some more of our great videos. Thanks again for listening.